Matt Weiss was a trusted figure in the world of football, a rising star at the University of Michigan, a seasoned NFL coach, and a man with decades of experience. He was known for his sharp mind on the field, his ability to strategize under pressure, and his role in shaping some of the top quarterbacks in the game. Players respected him. Colleagues admired him. Parents trusted him with their sons' futures. But behind the wins, the playbooks, and the carefully crafted image of a devoted family man, investigators say there was something else, something that no one saw coming. December 2022. The University of Michigan's football program was at the top of its game. Players were preparing for a major bowl appearance. Coaches were deep into game plans. The atmosphere was charged with anticipation. But behind closed doors, a different kind of pressure was building. One that would soon unravel into a shocking criminal investigation. Reports began to surface of suspicious activity at Schembechler Hall, the heart of Michigan football operations. What initially seemed like a minor security issue quickly escalated. Computers had been accessed without authorization. Files were compromised. Personal information had been stolen. And as investigators dug deeper, they uncovered a disturbing pattern. Hundreds of athletes' personal accounts had been infiltrated, and private, intimate material had been extracted. At the center of it all was one name, Matt Weiss. How did a respected coach with everything to lose become the mastermind behind one of the most invasive breaches of trust in college sports history? What drove him to target young athletes, players who had looked up to him as a mentor? And how did investigators finally connect the dots? And could it have been stopped before so many lives were damaged? The answers to these questions would shock the sports world and expose a hidden side of Matt Weiss that no one could have imagined. Matt Weiss was born into a stable, middle-class family, growing up in the quiet suburbs of Connecticut. From a young age, Weiss showed an intense interest in football, not just playing it but understanding it. While other kids focused on scoring touchdowns, Matt was the kid drawing up plays in his notebook, analyzing how the game worked at a deeper level. His family supported his passion, and by the time he reached high school, Weiss had already developed a reputation as a student of the game. He wasn't the most gifted athlete on the field, but his understanding of strategy and his ability to read defenses made him stand out. His football IQ was undeniable. After high school, Weiss attended Vanderbilt University, where his focus remained on football. He played as a walk-on, but it was clear early on that his future in the game wouldn't be as a player. It was his mind, his ability to analyze, adjust, and strategize that set him apart. After graduating, he knew his future was in coaching. Weiss began his coaching career at Stanford University, working under Jim Harbaugh. He started small, assisting with operations, breaking down film, helping with recruiting. But it wasn't long before Harbaugh recognized Weiss's talent. Weiss had a sharp analytical mind and a work ethic that impressed everyone around him. When Harbaugh moved to the NFL to coach the San Francisco 49ers, Weiss followed, learning the complexities of the professional game. But it was with the Baltimore Ravens where Weiss truly made his mark. Hired in 2009, he spent over a decade with the Ravens, working his way up through various positions, from coaching assistants to working with the quarterbacks and running backs. He was part of the staff that helped lead the Ravens to a Super Bowl victory in 2013. His attention to detail and his ability to adapt game plans under pressure made him invaluable. In 2021, Weiss's career took a major leap forward. Jim Harbaugh, now the head coach at the University of Michigan, called on Weiss to join his staff as the quarterback's coach. It was a prestigious position at one of the most storied programs in college football. In his first year, Weiss helped develop Michigan's offense, leading them to a Big Ten championship and a college football playoff appearance. By 2022, Weiss had been promoted to co-offensive coordinator, one of the most powerful positions in college football. He was known for his calm demeanor on the sidelines and his ability to connect with players. Athletes trusted him. They opened up to him. He was seen as a mentor, a strategist, and a steady presence in the high-stakes world of college football. But as Weiss's career reached its peak, no one knew that something else was happening behind the scenes. A secret life that would shatter his reputation and destroy the trust of those who had looked up to him. December 21, 2022. The University of Michigan football program was operating at full speed. The team was preparing for a major bowl game. Players were focused. Coaches were deep in game planning. But while the team concentrated on the field, something strange was happening behind the scenes. It started with unusual computer activity at Schembechler Hall, the nerve center of Michigan football. Access logs showed that someone had been logging into sensitive accounts at odd hours. Confidential files were being accessed, player information, personal data, even private messages. At first, it seemed like a technical issue, maybe a routine glitch in the system. But the pattern didn't stop. Over the next 2 days, the activity intensified. The University of Michigan Police Department was notified immediately. Cybersecurity specialists were brought in to investigate. What they discovered was alarming. Someone was deliberately bypassing security protocols to gain access to private files. The question was, who? Players and staff began to notice odd behavior. Some athletes reported that their personal files seemed to have been tampered with. Passwords had been changed without explanation. And then there was Weiss himself. Colleagues described him as distracted. He seemed on edge during meetings. He was quieter than usual, withdrawn. Behind closed doors, the university launched an internal investigation. High-level administrators were briefed. They reviewed computer logs and questioned staff. All signs pointed to a single source of the activity: Matt Weiss's university-issued computer. January 20, 2023. The university placed Weiss on leave. The official statement was brief, almost vague. Coach Weiss is being placed on leave pending an internal investigation into a university policy matter. No further explanation was given. Weiss's response? Silence. He didn't issue a statement. He didn't deny the allegations. He didn't speak to reporters. The man who had once commanded respect on the sidelines, who had been known for his calm and calculated presence under pressure, suddenly vanished from public view. Behind the scenes, the investigation widened. Cybersecurity specialists traced the activity back to Weiss's credentials. Investigators weren't just looking at university files, they were beginning to uncover something far more invasive, something that stretched beyond the football program and into the private lives of the athletes themselves. But the university's swift response raised questions. Why was Weiss's computer being used to access such personal information? Was it possible someone else was involved? Or was Weiss hiding a secret that had been festering beneath the surface for years? What investigators discovered next would shock the entire sports community and reveal a side of Matt Weiss that no one could have imagined. When the University of Michigan's internal investigation pointed to Matt Weiss, it quickly became clear that this was no ordinary data breach. The scale of the unauthorized activity was staggering, and the evidence suggested that it wasn't confined to just the university. Law enforcement wasted no time. The FBI's Detroit Cyber Task Force was called in. Federal agents seized Weiss's university-issued computer and any other personal devices he may have used. What they found would unravel a sophisticated and deeply disturbing operation. Digital forensics experts combed through Weiss's hard drives, emails, and account history. The evidence painted a chilling picture: unauthorized access to thousands of personal accounts. Not just at the University of Michigan, but at over 100 colleges and universities across the country. The victims? Female athletes. Collegiate competitors. Some of the most recognizable names in college sports. And the pattern was clear: Weiss had been targeting them deliberately. Investigators discovered that Weiss had collected personal information about these athletes. Not just their names and contact details, but deeply personal files, including intimate photos and videos. Weiss had been careful. He knew how to cover his tracks. He used sophisticated hacking techniques, phishing scams that tricked athletes into providing their passwords, brute force attacks to bypass security systems, and even social engineering tactics that exploited trust and familiarity. The scale of the crime was almost incomprehensible. More than 150,000 individual records had been compromised: personal messages, cloud storage files, and private images. Some files had been duplicated and stored on external hard drives. Others had been shared on encrypted networks, evidence that Weiss might have been distributing this material to others. And it had been going on for years. Investigators traced the earliest evidence of unauthorized access back to 2015, long before Weiss had joined the University of Michigan. It appeared that he had been refining his methods for nearly a decade. What started as simple password hacks had evolved into a calculated and methodical scheme. Investigators discovered that Weiss had built detailed profiles of his victims. He studied their athletic histories, their physical characteristics, and their schedules. He knew when they traveled for competitions, when they returned to their dorms, even where they stored their private files. How could this have gone unnoticed for so long? How could a respected figure in the sports community, a coach trusted by players and admired by colleagues, have concealed such a dark double life? The FBI's investigation intensified. Federal charges were prepared. University officials scrambled to contain the fallout. For the athletes involved, the sense of violation was profound. Their trust had been betrayed. Their privacy had been stolen. But Weiss remained silent. No public statement. No explanation. No denial. The once promising coach, the man who had guided teams through high-stakes moments on the field, was now at the center of a scandal that would shake the foundation of college sports. On January 20, 2023, Matt Weiss's career at the University of Michigan came to an abrupt end. After refusing to meet with university officials to discuss the growing evidence of hacking and unauthorized access, the decision was made. Weiss was officially dismissed from his position as co-offensive coordinator and quarterbacks coach. But Weiss's problems didn't end there. Within hours of his termination, federal agents moved in. Early that morning, FBI agents arrived at Weiss's home. Neighbors watched as unmarked vehicles pulled up to the quiet suburban house. The agents were equipped with a federal search warrant, and they weren't leaving empty-handed. Weiss was taken into custody without incident. He didn't resist. He didn't speak. He stood in silence as agents searched his home, confiscating computers, phones, and storage devices. The evidence was already mounting. But the scale of the charges would stun even the most experienced investigators. News of Weiss's arrest spread quickly. Within hours, it dominated sports headlines across the country. Reporters stationed outside his home captured images of Weiss being escorted into a black government vehicle, his expression vacant, his hands cuffed behind his back. The Michigan football community was stunned. Teammates and former players who had trusted Weiss, who had looked to him for guidance, now questioned how they could have missed the signs. A coach respected for his strategic mind and calm demeanor was now facing accusations that could land him in prison for decades. Then came the formal charges. Federal prosecutors charged Matt Weiss with 14 counts of unauthorized computer access, each carrying a penalty of up to 5 years in prison. But the most damaging charges were related to identity theft. Prosecutors added 10 counts of aggravated identity theft, each carrying a mandatory minimum sentence of 2 years. The total potential penalties? Over 100 years in federal prison. The Department of Justice's statement was blunt. Weiss had not only violated privacy laws, he had engaged in a pattern of targeted hacking, manipulating victims' trust, and exploiting personal data for personal gain. The scale of the operation suggested intent. It suggested calculation. It suggested that Weiss had known exactly what he was doing. For the victims, hundreds of young athletes, the charges represented a step toward justice. But for Weiss's family, the fallout was devastating. His wife and children withdrew from public view. Friends and former colleagues struggled to reconcile the man they knew with the allegations now filling court documents. When Weiss appeared in federal court for his arraignment, his demeanor was cold. No emotion. No explanation. Just a simple plea of not guilty despite the overwhelming evidence stacked against him. The courtroom was packed. Rows of seats were filled with reporters, former colleagues, and even some of the athletes Weiss had allegedly targeted. As Weiss was escorted from the courtroom, he glanced toward the gallery. His expression was unreadable. What had driven a respected coach, a man with a seemingly successful career and a stable family life, to commit such a calculated and damaging crime? And how would the legal system hold him accountable? The fallout from Matt Weiss's alleged crimes extended far beyond the courtroom. For the young athletes whose lives had been violated, the damage was profound and it was personal. Many of the victims had no idea they had been targeted until law enforcement contacted them. It started with a phone call or a knock on the door, agents from the FBI informing them that their personal accounts had been accessed, their private photos and videos stolen. For some, the files had already been shared on dark corners of the internet. For others, the realization that someone they had trusted, a respected figure in the sports world, had invaded their privacy left them shattered. One victim, a Division I athlete, described the moment she learned her personal photos had been hacked. "I felt sick to my stomach. Violated. It's like someone had ripped open a part of my life I thought was safe," she said. The psychological toll was immediate and severe. Anxiety, depression, paranoia, Some victims described being unable to sleep, terrified that more private content could surface at any moment. Others withdrew from social media entirely, erasing years of personal history in a desperate attempt to protect themselves from further exposure. Counselors and trauma specialists who worked with the victims reported patterns of emotional distress, feelings of helplessness, anger, and overwhelming shame. Many athletes said they struggled to focus on their sport or schoolwork, haunted by the idea that someone had been watching them, studying them, targeting them. One young woman, a track and field star, said, "I used to love competing. Now, every time I step onto the field, I wonder who's watching. It's like I lost a piece of myself." The scope of the violation was staggering, and so was the betrayal. Athletes at the University of Michigan and across the country voiced their outrage. How had a figure so embedded in the athletic community, someone with access to team facilities, rosters, and private information, been able to commit such a widespread violation without raising alarms? The University of Michigan faced immediate backlash. Students gathered outside Schembechler Hall, holding signs that read, "Protect our athletes," and "We deserve better." Faculty and staff demanded answers. How had this gone unnoticed for so long? How had someone with that level of access not been monitored more closely? University officials responded with public statements, promising full cooperation with law enforcement and pledging to review internal security protocols. The athletic department introduced mandatory privacy training for staff and players, but for the victims it was too late. On social media, the reaction was swift and brutal. Weiss's name became a trending topic, not for his achievements on the football field, but for the scandal that had rocked the sports world. Comments flooded platforms like Twitter and Reddit, some expressing outrage, others disbelief, and many questioning how someone in Weiss's position could have acted without detection for so long. How could this happen? One tweet read, "Thousands of victims and no one saw the signs?" Former players and colleagues who had once worked with Weiss struggled to process the allegations. Some issued public statements condemning the crimes. Others remained silent. A few expressed shock, saying they had never suspected Weiss was capable of such actions. "He was so calculated on the field," one former player said. "Maybe we should have seen it." For the victims, the damage was lasting. Some left their teams, unable to face the reminder of what had been taken from them. Others remained, determined to reclaim their sense of security. But the scars, emotional and psychological, would remain. One victim put it plainly, "He took more than just pictures. He took our trust. And I don't know if we'll ever get that back." As the investigation closed in and the weight of the charges became undeniable, the question remained, how would Matt Weiss respond? Weiss's initial reaction was silence. In the days following his dismissal from the University of Michigan, Weiss avoided the media entirely. Reporters stationed outside his home were met with closed blinds and unanswered knocks at the door. His legal team, however, wasted no time in stepping forward. Weiss retained a high-profile defense attorney known for handling complex federal cases. The first statement from his lawyer was carefully worded, "Mr. Weiss is cooperating fully with the investigation. He denies any wrongdoing and looks forward to clearing his name in court." But behind the scenes, prosecutors were building a case that would be difficult, if not impossible, to dismantle. The evidence against Weiss was extensive and damning. Federal investigators had traced the digital trail directly to him, logins from his personal devices, IP addresses tied to his home, and recovered files containing thousands of images and videos taken from the accounts of young athletes. The prosecution's case was built on data, timestamps, login records, and patterns of behavior that showed Weiss had been methodical in his hacking efforts. Agents uncovered evidence that he had used software to breach password-protected accounts, targeting athletes based on their physical characteristics and personal histories. Prosecutors argued that Weiss had accessed some accounts repeatedly over months, even years, not out of impulse, but with calculated precision. Federal prosecutors outlined the charges: 14 counts of unauthorized computer access, each carrying a penalty of up to 5 years, and 10 counts of aggravated identity theft, with mandatory minimum sentences of 2 years each. If convicted on all counts, Weiss could face decades behind bars. Despite the strength of the evidence, Weiss's legal team signaled early that they intended to fight the charges. They argued that the data trail was circumstantial, that other individuals could have gained access to Weiss's devices, or that the breaches were the result of third-party interference. They also hinted at possible mental health issues, suggesting that Weiss's actions, if proven, could have been influenced by personal struggles rather than criminal intent. Weiss's defense strategy focused on introducing doubt. Could the prosecution prove beyond a reasonable doubt that Weiss had acted alone? Could they prove intent, that he had knowingly violated privacy laws rather than accidentally accessing sensitive information? His attorneys filed motions to suppress key evidence, challenging the methods used by federal agents to obtain search warrants and access Weiss's personal devices. But the prosecution remained confident. They had the data. They had the victims' testimonies. And they had a pattern of behavior that pointed directly to Weiss. The FBI's forensic analysis showed that Weiss had used specific hacking tools to bypass security measures. Investigators discovered that Weiss had stored the stolen files in encrypted folders on external drives hidden under innocuous file names. As the trial date approached, speculation swirled about whether Weiss would attempt to negotiate a plea deal. Legal analysts suggested that the sheer weight of the evidence might force his hand, that accepting a reduced sentence in exchange for a guilty plea could be his best option. But Weiss's legal team pushed back, filing motions to delay the trial and requesting additional time to review the prosecution's case. In court filings, Weiss's attorneys hinted at a possible defense rooted in psychological evaluation. They requested that Weiss undergo a psychiatric assessment, suggesting that mental health issues or compulsive behavior might have played a role in his alleged actions. Legal experts noted that this could signal a strategy aimed at mitigating sentencing rather than securing an acquittal. Meanwhile, the victims waited. For many, the prospect of seeing Weiss face justice brought little comfort. Some had already stepped forward, prepared to testify in open court about the violation of their privacy. Others remained anonymous, their statements submitted through prosecutors in sealed documents. One victim told reporters, "It's not just about what he did. It's about the fact that he thought he could get away with it. That's what makes it so hard to live with." The legal battle ahead promised to be drawn out and painful. The evidence was overwhelming, the charges severe. But for Matt Weiss, the question wasn't just whether he would be convicted, it was whether any defense could possibly explain how a trusted coach had become the center of one of the largest hacking scandals in college sports history. Matt Weiss was once seen as a rising star in the world of football, a strategic mind on the field, a trusted leader in the locker room. He had climbed the ranks from a young coaching assistant to the co-offensive coordinator at one of the most prestigious college football programs in the nation. But beneath that polished exterior, authorities say Weiss was hiding a dark truth, one that would unravel not only his career but the lives of countless young athletes. The investigation that began with suspicious computer activity at Schembechler Hall quickly spiraled into a federal case that exposed the scope of Weiss's alleged crimes. Over 150,000 compromised records. Thousands of victims. Young athletes who had trusted their personal information to secure systems only to find that their privacy had been violated by someone they were supposed to trust. The FBI's investigation revealed a deliberate pattern of exploitation, targeted hacking, invasive data breaches, and a systematic effort to gain access to intimate content. Federal agents traced the digital trail back to Weiss's personal devices, uncovering encrypted files and sophisticated hacking tools. The evidence was overwhelming. Weiss's arrest and subsequent legal battle exposed the cracks beneath his carefully managed public image. Once respected by players and peers alike, Weiss now faced the reality of criminal charges, 14 counts of unauthorized computer access and 10 counts of aggravated identity theft. The penalties were severe, potentially decades in prison if convicted. For the victims, the damage extended beyond the courtroom. The violation of their privacy left emotional scars that no legal verdict could erase. Athletes who had dedicated their lives to their sport were now forced to contend with the trauma of exploitation. Some spoke out publicly, demanding accountability. Others chose to remain silent, grappling with the emotional toll in private. Weiss's defense team sought to undermine the evidence, pointing to circumstantial factors and raising questions about mental health. But the prosecution held firm, the data trail was direct, the pattern clear. Weiss had exploited his position of power to target young athletes, and the consequences of those actions could not be ignored. In the end, the story of Matt Weiss is not just about the fall of a coach, it's about the betrayal of trust. It's about the devastating impact of exploitation and the struggle to reclaim a sense of security after that trust is shattered. A man who once shaped the futures of athletes may now have destroyed the lives of many. The fallout from Matt Weiss's actions will echo far beyond the football field. The case of Matt Weiss is a chilling reminder of how power and trust can be weaponized. The athletes who were targeted placed their trust in a system and in a man who ultimately betrayed them. The emotional and psychological damage caused by this breach of trust will linger long after the headlines fade. As this case unfolds, it raises serious questions about privacy and security in the digital age. How can institutions better protect sensitive information? What steps can be taken to prevent this kind of exploitation from happening again? These are questions that demand answers, not just for the victims of Matt Weiss, but for all athletes and students whose personal data could be at risk. If you found this video informative, please consider liking and subscribing to the channel. Share your thoughts in the comments. How can schools and institutions strengthen privacy protections for students and athletes? Your voice matters. Thank you for watching. And stay tuned for more in-depth coverage of cases that demand attention.